while the fins continue to dry, we can skip ahead a little bit and install the baffle. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do is tie on the shock cord. So we've got this here, and one end of this needs to go onto the baffle. Now you can use the shock cord that comes with it, or if you want to substitute out Kevlar, you could do that as well. I'm going to do this one with the stock shock cord. And so we'll just tie this on with a couple of overhand knots. Okay, pull that taut, and then we'll just put a little dab of glue on the knot. And just work that down inside there. And then cut off all of it about 5 or 6 millimeters of the free end so it doesn't get caught in places we don't want it to. Alright, and then there are 2 sticks that come with the model. Okay, now one of these is longer than the other. The shorter one we're going to use as a spacer for this. The longer one we'll use to glue it. Alright, what I'm going to do first here is just make a mark where the short one ends against the longer one. And then the longer one we'll use to apply the glue here. So what I'm going to do is put my thumbnail on that mark, get a dollop of glue here on the end of the stick. Alright, and then I'm going to put this in the forward end of the tube and then bring it up against the inside and just run that around. Alright, I'll take a look inside. Could use a little bit more glue there. So just repeat the process again. Okay. Now, the screw eye here should be facing forward. I'm going to put this in. Okay, and then just slide that inward, and now I'm going to stand this up like that so that I go down flush, and then just quickly pull the stick out just in case you have some excess glue there. Now you don't want to tug on this, and we just want to let this dry for a good 20 minutes or more before we do anything on the other end. In the meantime, we should be able to put the fins on pretty soon. Now we're ready to install the motor mount in preparation for installing the fin can. And this is going to fit in like this. So we marked 5/8 of an inch here from the aft end of the sleeve, and when we put this in, this will go up to that mark, and then we want this rotated so that the engine clip is in line with the launch lug. And then the fin can will fit over this, and the engine mount itself should stick out just a few millimeters there. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is go ahead and install this. And here I'm going to use an applicator. And I'm going to put a layer of glue just inside the body tube. Okay, so you want this even, but not too heavy. Alright, and now I'm just going to place this in. Okay, so again I need to, this is my launch lug mark and my depth mark there. I'll put this in and rotate. Alright, and you just see my mark there on the edge. So So just let that dry for a few minutes, doesn't take too long. After a few minutes drying, then we can go ahead and apply glue here. So you're going to apply the glue, in this case, to the forward edge of the fin can. Right now in the instructions it refers to the red fins and the white fins and things like this. If you've marked the launch lug line on the fin can, don't worry about the rest of it. Okay, because what we're going to do now is just slide this on and line up with that launch lug line, and that should line up everything else. Okay, so if you're off a little bit there, don't worry about it. As long as that launch lug line is lined up, everything else should be fine. Okay, and now we'll let this dry for a few minutes and move on to the nozzle. Now if you had the case where you've got the older kit and you've got the farther apart engine rings here, we can still do this. So the first thing we're going to need to do is make a mark here. Okay, we still need that 5/8 inch mark, but we're going to have to do it on the motor tube itself. So that is going to be right there. Okay, and when we put this in, I'm just going to dry fit it here. Alright, we're going to have to put it in to there. Okay, and the key thing here is to make sure this is as straight as possible, because you don't have that entire sleeve that's helped keeping it aligned. The other thing will be that we'll need to put the glue a little bit further up there so that most of it actually just resides on this ring and not smeared against the inside. Okay, so once you get that into place, let the glue dry for just a few minutes, just enough to make it tacky, but you can still adjust this around if you need to. And then you'd go ahead and put your fin can on here. Okay, and it should still stick out about that far. Now, something else you could do here, now I don't have any fins on this, I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes, is that you could, as far as I can tell, potentially go through and instead of assembling the fin can separately, is go ahead first of all and butt joint this together. Okay, so you want to take a thin but even film of glue, glue this on. Okay, and one thing that might help you with that is if you have an old 24mm engine spacer. Okay, like this one here. Okay, and that would help you hold this in place. You just need to be careful that you don't glue this inside there. Okay, but you could use this to go ahead, butt joint this together, put that in to make sure you're straight, hold it for about 30 seconds, and then pull this out. You might even want to wrap this in some wax paper. Okay, and then after this has dried, go ahead, put your engine mount in. Alright, leaving about a 1/4 inch sticking out there. And then go ahead, use your fin marking guide and just mark this as you would a longer tube. Okay, so it's a little bit off from the instructions, but that should be a way you can salvage this and still have it look the way it's supposed to. Once the glue has set up on the fin can, then we can go ahead and attach the nozzle. And for this you want a fairly heavy bead of glue because it is plastic here. And this is going to fit this way over the engine clip. Okay, and this should butt right up against the inner engine ring. Okay, so I'm going to pull that out again. And once again, using an applicator, I'm going to apply some glue here. Now this is going to get really tight. You might even want a thinner applicator. So I think what I may do is use the back end of one of these. Okay. So yeah, even this is kind of tight. Alright, and it's not a big deal if you get the glue on the outside of the engine mount here. A lot of that will get pushed in by the nozzle and then we can wipe off the excess. But do make sure that you don't get any in the engine mount. If you do, wipe it off as soon as you do it. And also try to avoid getting glue on the engine clip there. Okay, so just like that. Make sure I don't have any in the engine tube. Alright, and then come back around here, line up with the engine clip, and now just push this firmly into place. And you actually want that little bit of glue there. That's going to help fill in the spaces. And just smooth that around. Alright, now after this is glued and dried, we want to go ahead and put fillets all the way around this. So fin fillets here and launch lug fillet there. And then you may also want to fill in the groove here between the nozzle and the body tube there. And you could do that either with some more wood glue or you could use some plastic model putty for that. So I'm going to let this whole thing dry here while I assemble the parachute. The parachute comes self-assembled, so all we need to do is spread it out, untangle the shroud lines, and then gather all of these kind of hooked around one finger like this. And now take your other hand, find the center of the parachute sheet, hold it there, all right, and then just pull and release the shroud lines and the parachute here until all of the corners are close to being the same place there. And once you get that, then just kind of pinch off the loop here so the lengths don't change. And the picture here in the instructions is very generic. The nose cone actually looks like this. And if you're going to do it this way, then simply tie this onto the screw eye as they show here. So pass this loop through, and then once you pull the loop through the screw eye, pass the entire parachute through it. Okay, now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I don't like to do this. Instead, I prefer to use a snap swivel, and you can get these at any place that sells fishing supplies. And so here, I'm going to take and pass this shroud line loop through the swivel side. Okay, you may have to kind of scrunch those down. Okay, and once you have all of them through, go ahead and open the loop again. So now what I'm going to do is pass the entire snap swivel through that open loop. Okay, and then just bend the shroud line down again, and then gently tighten it. So now it forms a nice little knot around the loop there. And just as we did with the shock cord, we're going to use a little bit of glue here to make sure that knot does not move. Okay, just a tiny amount, you don't need much. And then now, when you're ready, simply open up the snap, pass that through your screw eye, and then snap it on. And that's all there is to it. And this way you can change the parachute out easily. If you don't like to store your parachute inside the rocket, then you pull it out, put it wherever you put your parachutes. On a windy day, this means you can also pull the parachute out and put a streamer on or put a smaller parachute on. So I'm going to go ahead and put this aside. Our last structural step is to tie on the shock cord to the nose cone, and you'll do this in the exact same way that we tied it to the Baffle. Just put a couple of half hitches on here, or a couple of overhand knots, glue that on, and then cut off the excess from the free end there. Now, I am not going to do that quite yet because I may want to paint the nose cone separately from the rest of the body, and it's just easier to do that if I don't have it all attached already. Okay, there's actually one more thing we need to do here, and that's to apply the fillets. So once the launch lug and the fins have dried, then we're simply going to run a bead of glue here along. Okay, and you'll want to have some tissue handy here. This is always messy. Alright, and then just take your finger and smooth those in. Alright, and if you like to have really thick fillets, that's fine, but I recommend doing them in several layers instead of trying to get one thick fillet on all at once. Okay, we'll also need to do fillets along the fins here. And here we're going to want these relatively thin so that we don't hide the detail work here. The same way, just smooth those in. And for fillets, I like to do one face at a time whenever I can. And so this means on this fin will be on the same face. Okay, again, try and keep it off, smooth it into the detail work there. Alright, and now I'll let this dry for a few minutes with this face sitting up, and that way the glue won't try and run to one end or the other, or run down onto the fin or onto the body tube. So I'll do the rest of these off camera, and at that point we're pretty much done structurally. At this point my fillets are still finishing total drying here. But the rocket is essentially done, structurally speaking. Okay, so you can see all the way around we've got all the fillets in place. Alright, nose cone, again, I have not fully attached, but it's ready to go. And once the fillets are dry, we can prepare the rocket for finishing. And so a few things you may want to examine. One is if you get bubbles in your fillets here, and you can either just re-glue these, and sometimes the bubbles still show up, or you can fill those in with modeling putty. And then the same thing down here. So the seam in the body tube and the seam between the body tube and the nozzle, these can both be filled in either with some additional glue or with modeling putty. So I'm going to use the modeling putty here. Mine is from Testers. There are several other brands as well. And so the nice thing about this is it's water soluble and relatively fast drying. And so we can just add a bead of this. That liquid often comes out with the first shot, don't worry about it. It also cleans up. Okay, and then you can simply smooth that in with a finger. Alright, that liquid stuff is going to be a little bit messy. Okay, to avoid this, simply squeeze the first little bit out of the tube into a waste container of some kind. Alright. And then we can do the same thing on the other side. And we shouldn't have all that gooey stuff this time, so this should come out fairly evenly. Now I will warn you, don't use this in place of glue fillets, because although it smooths in very nicely, it does not have the strength of the glue. So you always want to have glue fillets underneath this first. And like with glue, if you don't like the way it goes on the first time, you can add more. But once it gets out, it starts setting up almost immediately. So you want to get your initial smoothing, and then if it's not the way you want it, let it dry completely first, do a little sanding if you need to, and then try to re-smooth it with a new coat. Okay, over here on the seam, you don't need very much. And here you just kind of want to wiggle it back and forth a little bit, just so you fill that groove. And then we'll come back and sand that. Okay, I'm going to continue this not only with the rest of the body tube, but I'll do the same thing down here on the nozzle, but I'm going to do that off camera. After the model putty had dried, I went ahead and sanded it smooth again using some 320 grit sandpaper, and so that involved removing most of what was around the grooves here, and what's left behind is just the small amount needed to fill in those spaces there. I did the same thing on the nose around the junction between the nose cone and the little payload section there. So everything now is ready for priming. I'm going to use a simple flat white primer. If you prefer, you can use a fillable sandable primer, and with that, using multiple layers, that will help fill in the grooves of the spirals here. I really don't care that much that I don't get them completely filled. So for this one, I'm just going to use the white primer, and then that will be followed by the paint on the fins in the body tube and the nose. At this point, I have added a layer of primer, and then I lightly sanded that to remove any drips or other imperfections that popped up. And now, before we get ready to paint it, I'm just going to use a moistened tissue here with alcohol to remove that sanding dust once again. You don't want a lot of alcohol, just enough to moisten the tissue. But that sanding dust, I've found, can lead to crinkling of the paint if you don't get it all off. If you have a compressor handy, you can use a jet of air to remove the dust as well. Okay, and then the same thing for the nose cone here. Alright, now let that dry for about 15 minutes to make sure all the alcohol is removed, and then we can go on to paint the body and fins. Now if you're going to do this according to the paint scheme in the instructions, the fin opposite the launch lug should be painted white. And what I'm going to do is just paint the entire rocket white as kind of an undercoat, and then I'll mask off the fin that will be white and then paint the whole rocket red. The base white coat now has dried, and I'm going to mask off the fin opposite the launch lug and then paint the rocket red. Okay, now that the paint is done, we need to apply the vinyl decals, and there are two of these, so there are these two white vinyl decals with lettering on them, and then there's also a small set of water slide decals that we'll do after that. Okay, so if we align this with the drawings here, okay, so if we'll have one here between the white and red fins, and these extend from the coupler there, which you may not be able to see with the red paint on it there, basically up to its full length. So for example, this one is going to go like this, and we'll go all the way up to the body tube. Okay. Now, to make this easier to do, I've got some room temperature water here that has just a drop of dishwashing liquid in it, and this will allow us to reposition the decal without ripping the paint or the decal itself. It makes it a little bit slippery, and then once it's dried, it will still become permanent. Okay, so here I'm just going to take the decal and I'm just going to run it through the water here. Don't have to leave it in or anything. Okay, but I do want to make sure I've got the whole back side coated with it. Okay, and so the United States should be facing upward. Alright, and the decal, let's see, let me have this around backwards here. So we want, alright, so we want to try and run this down the middle. Okay, and then bring it up. So right there, I'm right on the line, and then this is going to come up toward the end of the body tube, like that. Okay, and that looks reasonably straight. And so here I'll just take my finger first of all and press this down gently. Alright, still checking. It's not quite centered between the fins there. Although the drawing here is actually showing it right up against the fin. And it's doing that on both sides. So we'll go ahead and reposition this. Now I'm just going to squeegee that down with a tissue to take off the excess water. Now when you're all done with this, if you decide that you want a clear coat on it, wait at least 24 hours for the decals to fully dry. Alright, and then this one is going to go on this side in the same manner. Now for the water slide decals, we need to cut these out, and these need to be cut within the red lines. The red lines are not part of the decal, so just go ahead and cut those out. Okay, so I have those two decals there, and I've exchanged my water, so I've rinsed out the dish there, removing the water with the dish detergent in it, and here I've replaced it with just some room temperature water. And I recently saw a video put out on the Apogee website that shows using a little bit of white glue added to this to help keep your water slide decals from peeling up again. And I'm going to try that here. So here I'm going to put some white glue in, and it's not really specified how much. I'm going to say about that much. I make some really cool patterns too. Okay, and here I'm just going to swirl it in. Now, coming back to our diagram, the first decal, right, the small strip of bolts here, this is to go right down here at the edge of the nose cone assembly. So here I'm just going to pop this in the water and let that sit for about 20 seconds or so. Alright, and here I'm just checking to make sure they do slide, and now I'm just going to apply this onto the nose cone and pull the paper backing off as I rotate this. I'm going to go ahead and pull off the nose cone assembly here, and that actually went on pretty much the way I wanted it to. Alright, so now I will go ahead and just blot that a little bit with some tissue here. Oop. Okay, we don't want it to move like that. Alright, I'm just holding on to one end there while I squeegee around. Okay, and then the larger one here, this is going to go right here between the white strip and the edge of the body tube, but we don't want this to overlap onto the white strips. Alright, the black patch there should go between the white strips on the launch lug side. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. just releasing right there. Okay, so here we want to start about that point there. And I'm just going to, again, pull the paper out from under it and bring it around. Okay, and then we can adjust this. Actually, that came really close. So I'll make sure we don't have any decal above the edge. And then also nothing on the white strips. Alright, so that is my black Brant IIIB. So this is actually kind of a fun kit to build. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. I think the painting took me as much time as the building did. The only other thing you might want to think about is whether or not you want to paint the nozzle down there a different color. The illustration on the box does not show a different color down there, although I've made the same model from another manufacturer and they had a black nozzle. And if that's the case, it's probably easiest just to paint that in by hand. Alright, with that, have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for one of my other videos.